Hello. Today I will be talking about our Lord and Savior Chimney Rabble and its impact on the Phyrexia all will be one draft format broadly, and sort of what it means, like what its dominance means for the future and other limited contexts. So for those of you who don't know, we are in the Chimney Rabble meta, the Rabble meta as I am referring to it. So these are just sort of the stats on Chimney Rabble, 17 land stats on Chimney Rabble. I've broken them down here, the sort of the relevant ones. We'll notice I have their ranks amongst commons here. The average last seen out of 585 is the 39th. Average taken out is number 26. Its opening hand win rate is 59.6 at number 4, and its game and hand rate is 59.7 at number 1. Now this is sort of basically tied with Contagious Vorak, so they sort of go back and forth. But at the time that I recorded the stats for this, it was number 1. It may have updated, it may not. They're basically like the same. But for all intents and purposes, it is number 1 for the game and hand win rate, and it's rare that a 4-drop is the fourth best opening hand win rate common. It's hard to have a 4-mana card be so good in your opening hand because you don't get to play it for 4 turns, obviously. But the thing about this card is that the card is underrated. You can see that it is taken by the broader Magic community, not just the 17 lands users, as the 39th best common, sort of in a vacuum, the 39th best, whatever you want to qualify best as, common in the set. And obviously it's winning like it's the best common. And it's rare to see a discrepancy like this. I don't think we have seen a card be this far off in terms of what people perceive it as and how it's performing. At the common level. Of course, there are cards that are like rares and uncommons and whatever, the people that have misperceptions about. But when it's a common like this, it's often very difficult for this type of thing to occur. People generally, like, the best cards are pretty obvious. Like, everybody saw Contagious Vorak and said, oh, this card's amazing. Whatever. People saw Inspiring Overseer and said, this card's amazing, it's really good. It's just 3 mana, win the game, whatever. Common. Oregon Hoarder. Early people weren't like as high as it ended up being, but I think we kind of got there. I think the best comparison actually is probably Lunarch Veteran for this card. Is sort of the card that I think of the most with. I think Lunarch Veteran was one of the winningest cards, if not the winningest card common in Midnight Hunt, and I still think it was taken higher than 39th, even at the start of the format. Now, part of the reason it's taken so late is people have an aversion to drafting higher cost cards in this set. It's a set that is very fast, and people need to have lower curves as a result. So I think people will take a 2-drop over Chimney Rabble a lot, and I think in spots where they're probably not supposed to. You'll notice that the average taken out for 17 lands users is significantly higher rank-wise. Obviously, the 7.18 is different because it is of a different scale, right? Like the average taken out is always going to be a higher number than the average last seen at, just because of how the stat is collected. But you can see it's the number 26 card there, which means it's taken 13 cards higher by the better players in the community, but it's still not taken high enough by those players either. I don't think it's arguable that you should take this. Like, honestly, if you made an argument for taking this over Contagious Vorak, I think you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. I'm not sure that I would do it, pack 1, pick 1, but I think that the argument would be it's in a better color, right? Red is the best color. So you are taking a common that is in the highest or best performing color in the entire format, and you're getting basically the same value, win percentage-wise. And people will say, oh, whatever. Chimney Rabble doesn't have any synergies. It doesn't synergize with anything in the format, and that's sort of where I would like push back. I think people oftentimes think of synergy as the be all end all. Like the cards in your deck all have to be doing the same thing. But I think the reality is that this is not a cube draft, right? Like limited is not so aggressive or so like important that your cards are all doing the same thing that a card like Chimney Rebel can't be better than all the other cards. Like I think that people have this like aversion to saying this card is raw power. And I know that to a certain extent stats are going to exemplify cards that are raw, just raw power level and don't have synergies, and I think people will take that and say, okay, because this is sort of a known thing with 17 land statistics, that cards that are good by themselves tend to do better than cards that work with other cards, that they discount them. They say that these stats don't matter because this card doesn't have any synergies, it's just really strong by itself. But I think that what is important to know, especially when drafting generally, is that the best card, like the cards you should take early, are the cards that do not necessarily need synergy to work, like Chimney Rebel, because you don't know where your deck's going to end up. You don't know what synergies you're going to have. A perfect example of this in this format would be the red 2-drops. So there are two 3s in red. I don't have images of them because they're whatever. There's the Kadotha Cackler and the Bladegraft Aspirant. And one of them cares about equipment and one of them cares about oil. Your deck should probably only ever want one of the two of them. You shouldn't probably ever be playing both in a deck, because neither of them are especially good, but they either can be serviceable as a 3-drop in your deck if you have the synergies for the one that you want, right? And you should probably just play the one that matches your synergies. They have the exact same stats and whatever. So situations like that are cards you do not want to take early, and you want to take the Chimney Rabble instead. I don't think that you're giving up. Like, Chimney Rabble gives you the opportunity to not give up any power while also not committing to a synergy in your deck. So I think that's what's so strong about the card. In terms of like why is it so good in this particular meta, like I haven't touched on that specific aspect of things. Well, first of all, it's 4 mana 3/3 haste. So that in a lot of formats runs into your opponent's 4-drop, but there aren't really any other good 4-drops, right? The common 4-drops don't have more than 3 toughness, at least not the good ones. So like there are very few cards that trade profitably on turn 4 with Chimney Rat, like that are just eating it, like preventing it from attacking. I'm trying to think of if there are any even that do it. There's the black 2/4 that's not very good, that doesn't trade properly, but at least blocks it. There's it's actually the black 2/4 is terrible against Chimney Rebel because you just play the Chimney Rebel, don't attack. You don't have to attack with the Chimney Rebel. That's the thing. Hidden mode on Chimney Rebel is play it, don't attack. And you are getting a 4 mana 4/4, right? Like the second body is extremely relevant as well. The 1/1 blocks a lot of things in the format. Doesn't block mites especially well, but who cares? It's just kind of like free. Like just getting the extra body is very important, especially in like your Hazardous Blast decks where you can get in with the Chimney Rabble on 4 for 3, and then you still have that 1/1 later. So like you're kind of getting the best of both worlds with this. You can attack and you can chump block something, usually is what the 1/1 will do on defense, and then you have the ability to keep getting in. So yeah, it kind of dominates the board, right? Like there's not really a whole lot of things that will just come down and completely stop it from attacking, at least on turn 4. I think that's part of the reason it's so good. So Chimney Rabble, moving on from the card itself, I mean, we've talked about sort of why it's so good, what it's doing, why it's positioned so well. There are many cards in this format that are like Chimney Rabble, that are undervalued by the arena community at large and are performing very well. These are sort of the examples I came up with. You'll notice they're mostly commons and they're mostly in red and white. There is Lattice Blade Mantis here as well. In my opinion, green is more overdrafted than white and red are. Red is still not drafted highly enough by the community at large. Red is clearly the best color, I think, at this stage because of its extreme depth at common. Mostly as a result of these cards here that form a strong package of synergy that is raw power, but also synergistic. And I think an example of that is Barb Batterfist would be a good example of a card that is a synergy card, but is positioned so well within the format as a 3/1 on turn 2. Because that 3 damage matters a decent amount if you can get in with it, and it does trade with pretty much every 2-drop in the format. Maybe forces your opponent to use removal spells on it. I've had that happen, and I'm just like, I can't believe you're using a removal spell on my like half of my card, because I'm still going to keep the Batterfist, and it's still going to do stuff for me. I can maybe even pick it up with the Indoctrination Attendant, which is pictured to its right there. Indoctrination Attendant is one of the most underrated cards still remaining, in white specifically. It is an insanely good card, and I think that people, for whatever reason, people don't like this card. It is one of the very, very few cards that does block Chimney Rabble on turn 4. It is... The 3/4 is so huge in this body, in this format, with like all of the 3-power things going around. Like, it just blocks so well, and it's really hard to find something that blocks profitably in the format. Generally, other things like to note from this are that Lattice Blade Mantis is still underrated. It's sort of the last green common that's underrated. I think people mostly kind of get how good green is. For some reason, it's the color that the population at large associates with being as strong as it actually is the most. I think green is probably the most correctly drafted color in terms of where its cards go. Compared to the other colors, I think red and white are still a little bit underdrafted, and I think that blue and black are still a little bit overdrafted. We will get into blue and black a little bit later. But yeah, so be on the lookout for these cards. These cards are cards that do go late. They are cards you can wheel at times that you probably shouldn't ever really be wheeling any of these cards. But if you can still do it, it can still happen on Arena, and I don't think that's likely to change. So let's talk about the archetypes in the format, the meta broadly. So these are sort of tiers that I've come up with just based on their win rates on the 17 lands color ratings section here. And my tier 1 is red, green, and red, white. You will hear other people disparaging red, white, and they'll say that it's not a tier 1 deck. And I don't really understand this perspective. I think the numbers clearly show that it is the second best deck in the format. And from my experience, I think I've actually performed better with red, white than I have with red, green overall. I've had a lot of success with red-white. I think red-white is my most drafted deck. It is my most successful deck broadly. And I think red-green is also very successful, but people know. People know about red-green. Everybody knows about red-green. I don't think everybody knows about red-white. And the reason I don't think everybody knows about red-white is that Bladehold Warwhip is a top 10 stat card and game and hand win rate card in the format. And I think that says something, right? It actually has a better performance stats-wise than Zenith Flare does. And I think people will sort of look at that and say, the synergy, they don't understand. And I think that to a certain extent, you just kind of have to just kind of accept that you're wrong here. right? Like, you just kind of have to accept, okay, Bladehold War Whip is actually a good card. Like, you don't just be a card with a top 10 game in hand win rate by accident. That doesn't just happen. It means that your card is extremely strong, right, by itself. It means the card is extremely strong by itself, and it is not a card that is reliant heavily on synergy, which I think people will tell you that Bladehold War Whip is reliant on synergy. I don't believe that. I think you should literally like just play Bladehold War Whip in every red white. Like, Bladehold War Whip is going to be an insane card for you in every single red white deck you have. If you have no other equipment in your deck, the card's great. Because if the card weren't great with no other equipment in your deck, it wouldn't be a top 10 card on 17 lands. It just wouldn't. It's not possible for a card that requires you to have other cards in your deck, like other specific types of cards in your deck, to be that strong. It just doesn't work that way. So, the card is insanely strong and is still extremely underdrafted by the community broadly. I would take it over pretty much every rare in the set. The only uncommon in either color I would take... Actually, I don't know. So it's tough, right? So do you take a Annex Sentry over Bladehold War Whip? Probably, right? Because it's a comparable level uncommon and is in only one color. Pack one, pick one. And similarly with Rebel Salvo, like, you could make the argument that you should take that over War Whip. I don't know. I think it's still possibly right that you're supposed to just take Bladehold War Whip and just commit. Like, I think that Red White is an open enough deck that committing to it pack one, pick one is something I'm happy to do. Because the colors are still pretty open. And yeah, so that's my little spiel on red white. On the tier 2 decks, green white, blue white, and black white all have win rates between 54 and 57, or like under 57%. And you'll notice this is sort of like the average. This is sort of the average tier, right? The average 17 lands user win rate is about 55% this set. This is actually low. It's the lowest it's been in quite a long time. It may actually be the lowest it's ever been on 17 lands, which is actually good if you're the creator of 17 lands, because it would tell you that the 17 lands community is becoming more like the average community, the average players on Magic Arena. It will never get there, of course, because it will never get to 50%, but you would like that win rate to be as close to 50% as you could get it. Now, I actually don't think it's because that there are more players that are that have lower win rates that are joining the program and are playing more. What I think it means in this case is that the better players are winning less. Good players are not doing as well in this format as they usually do. I would say that the reason behind this is that the format is very unconventional. It is the fastest format of all time, potentially. Certainly in the Arena era, it is the fastest format, and I don't really think it's especially close. So it sort of breaks a lot of the rules about what you're supposed to do in the early turns of a limited game of Magic. Like, you're supposed to mulligan a lot in this format. People will tell you, there are some people who will tell you you're not supposed to mulligan a lot in this format. You are definitely supposed to mulligan a lot in this format. I found myself mulliganing about, a couple percentage points more than usual, 5% more than usual, I think. Like, in some formats, like, like in Dominaria United, there's some of these hands that I would just never get rid of. Like, if I had like a 3-drop in DMU and I was on the draw, I'm keeping that hand every time, right? Like, I'm never pitching that hand. If I have both my colors of mana and I have a 3-drop, I'm never going to get rid of that. Because you just don't. There's just no reason to do it. Similarly, like in Brothers War, like, yes, you wanted to have something to do on turn 2, but the thing you did on turn 2 could be Energy Refractor, and you were fine. Like, you weren't like dead immediately. And yeah, so that's sort of where the users are in this format. In terms of the tier 2 decks, you'll notice that all of the remaining white decks are in this tier. This to me signals that white is the second best color. You could even make the argument it's the best color from like a well-roundedness standpoint, because there is a like the other 2 red decks are not in the tier 1 and tier 2 decks. So it might even be better to start in white than it is to start in red, because you're going to pretty much end up in a good deck no matter what you do. Yeah, that's kind of what the stats are telling me there. Tier 3 is sort of red-black is all by itself. I've decided to put red-black in its own tier. It's weird. It's kind of a weird deck. I recently drafted like a Jund deck, like actually like a straight up Jund deck, which I know is strange, but it had like Glissa and it was basically Jund busted 3-drops. It was Glissa and like 2 Charforgers and like 4 Racks. And that was just like the deck. That was the whole deck. It was just busted 3-drops. And that deck actually trophied somehow. And then immediately followed that deck up by going 0-3 with a Nissa deck. So that's like a ask me anything moment here. Like that was an absolute privilege to go 0-3 with Nissa in your deck. But you can't win them all, right? So that's how it goes sometimes. But I think red black can come together at times if you get 2 Charforgers and a bunch of good. And your deck is like mostly red cards, basically. And then we reach the blue tier, the remaining of the blue decks, blue, green, blue, black, and blue, red, all of which are pretty much unplayably bad, sitting around a 52 point something. I think blue black is 51% win rate, which is abhorrent. The blue decks are not doing very well in this format, and we'll talk about why a little bit in a moment here. But generally, people are drafting the blue cards and black cards too highly. Yeah, you'll notice that the best performing black decks are black, white, and red, black, which makes sense. Similar. Well, the best performing blue deck is blue, white. The blue, red is not the second best performing blue deck. So I don't know. The stats kind of show that white is actually the best color, and that red is sort of like also like sort of tied. But I think that I would rather be in red than white because I think red is more open than white. Yeah. All right, and let's talk a little bit about the good colors. We'll talk a little more about the good colors. I mentioned that I have sort of hinted at this. These are the good colors, the white, red, and green, the Naya colors. I think everybody at this point has heard this sentiment from people in the community. I am a little bit pessimistic about this correcting itself. I know people like to talk about the correcting nature of draft and whatever and all that stuff. I don't think that's going to happen in this format. The reason I don't think it's going to correct itself is that, unlike in most situations, there is not just one color that's very bad. There are 2 colors that are very bad. And specifically, one of those colors is black, which is a color that, in most sets, is overdrafted anyways. Black is a color that gets overdrafted almost every set without fail, because it has efficient removal spells, and people really, really overvalue those. And so it's very difficult to find yourself in a position where black is actually open, because people love their removal. Blue, similarly, requires a lot to actually work. It can work, but it requires a lot for it to be able to work in this format. And so you reach this point where basically you can't take these cards. You can't take a blue or a black card early unless it's really unless it's like a monolithically powerful card, because you're just not going to. You don't know if you're going to get past enough cards for your deck to even be functional. Whereas with red, green, and white cards, you're probably going to get past some cards. You're probably going to get some decent cards for the deck just in any of these combinations of colors, because they're so open all the time. And I think my big takeaway from this is that synergy is dead. These are the colors that have the least synergy. Red, green has like an oil deck or whatever, but the best red green decks don't need to be oil decks. They're just play Vorak on 3 into Rabble on 4, and they'll kill you. That's not, you don't need synergy for that. The best green-white decks similarly are like toxic decks, but they don't really have toxic. They're not killing you with poison, they're killing you with damage. They just have efficient creatures, and the toxic stuff is more of a tribal payoff thing. You just have it on the card just because it's there, and it activates some corrupted stuff, but you really aren't doing any corrupted stuff in green-white. And red-white is an equipment deck at its face value, but it's really just a Bladehold Warwhip deck. It's just busted uncommons deck. It has Warwhip, it has some other red and white uncommons that are really strong, and you get to take advantage of those in that deck. So I don't think that the synergy matters in these colors. I think that that's what's so strong about them is that to win, they don't need to have synergistic elements. They just kind of do their own thing and can kill you, and that's why I think they're performing so well in a format that's so aggressive and maybe doesn't give you time to set up for synergies on board. So black, about black, it's the same as it's always been. It is overdrafted again. There is exactly one card that is interesting in black, and it is pictured here. It is Anoint with Affliction. It is a good card. It is a very efficient removal spell, but it is not worth hitching your wagon to black and saying, I'm going to be black no matter what. I don't take this card enough. Like, I don't draft black enough, I think, just generally, because I'm so averse to drafting the color at this point, because I know how high people value the cards, that I, don't ever take this card, and I think that that's probably a mistake on my game. I could probably do better about that. But I think that generally I'm more often going to be right to not take the very good black cards in this format than I am to be wrong. And again, it could correct to the point where that's not the case anymore, but I just don't think that it's going to. I just don't see enough people being able to resist the temptation of this card and saying, I saw this Anoint with Affliction early, what was I supposed to do? Not draft black? And the answer often is yes, you're not supposed to draft black. You can't win a limited game of Magic the Gathering with just removal in your deck. And I think that people, for some reason, think that you can. And this sentiment has made the color very difficult to draft in recent sets because black has gotten some efficient removal. The last time black was underdrafted was Neon Dynasty. And that was only for about a week, and then people figured it out. It is a color that is often overdrafted. It is very hard. Maybe you could argue in DMU it was kind of underdrafted, but no, it wasn't really. It was mostly just blue-black control was underdrafted, not black itself. But yeah, and once people in sets where black's best removal, but when black's best cards are removal, the color is undraftable. Because people just take the removal and they're like, I don't want to take these other cards, whatever. And it becomes impossible to draft. So my advice to people playing this format is to not draft black ever, even when you think you're supposed to, and you'll probably do better. And it's not very fun advice, right? It's not very fun advice, but it is my advice. And blue, similarly, is in a spot where, once again, the format is too fast for blue. Blue's cards don't really, blue is a color that relies more on synergy than a lot of colors, the other colors do, and the synergy doesn't work in this format. Synergy is dead. And so the only synergy color that does work is blue-white, a deck that is basically all about artifacts in a format that nobody else cares about artifacts, so you can actually get enough stuff for your synergy to work. The other cards are just too slow. My child, Glistener Seer, the card that I liked so much, just isn't good. It's too slow in the format. It doesn't block well enough. I thought it would block well enough. It doesn't block well enough. It is not a card that can hold back the early aggression from decks. It gets outclassed too quickly, and the Scry doesn't make up for that. So it's not a color that can keep up with the format. Honestly, it's just too slow, and yeah, it's unfortunate, right? You'd like to have this not be the case. I actually do think that blue is a more draftable color than black, just because people know that blue is terrible and people don't know that black is terrible as much, and so you can actually find yourself in pods where the blue artifact stuff is open, and you can do the blue. And when you have the blue artifact stuff, it's very good. My only 7-0 drafted this format is actually a blue-white deck, where I had 3 blue Octasus Retrofitter guys at Uncommon, and they were really strong, and they did really strong things. But I had to get 3 of them in order for my deck to be good, right? You need to have these cards just be like completely available, and if they're not, you can't draft the color. So, and finally, this is sort of the last thing I'm going to talk about today, is that this is a damage format. This is not a poison format. And it's just too difficult to kill your opponent with poison. It basically, when you are playing a card with toxic, the card is often giving something up to get the toxic on it, right? Like, it's often not a good rate card by itself. If you took toxic off of Blightbelly Rat or Pestilence Siphon, are the two black cards that have it. Most of those cards would be bad cards. They would be unplayable cards, and I think that as a result of this, you can see that they basically, like, when you are evaluating a card, right? When you are evaluating a card for drafting in this format, what you should do, I think, generally, is look at the card and say, okay, I'm going to ignore the text on the card that says toxic, because I'm going to kill my opponent with poison so infrequently that this card is not going to matter unless I build my deck to do literally only that. There are people speculating about a blue-black, the blue-black burn deck where you have to kill your opponent with toxic every game. And I think that would sort of be the only situation where you can kind of try to be like, okay, the toxic text on this card actually does matter. And I've had a successful blue-black deck that sort of did something similar to that. But I would not recommend trying to go out and do it. I think it is a doable thing. I just don't think it's something that you should be trying to do. But generally, I think in every other deck, you're looking at the card and saying, okay, how good is this card if it doesn't have toxic on it? Like, what does this card look like to me if it doesn't have toxic on it? And you're like, oh, wait, this card is not that good. In most cases, Blightbelly Rat's a 2/2 that dies and proliferates. That's not strong. Pestilence Siphoner is literally just a 2-mana 1/1 flyer. Not very strong. The black 3/2 is a 3/2 that dies into a 1/1 that can't block. It's fine. It's better than some of the other cards, even. And I think if you just take the toxic off of the cards, you'll actually see what the cards actually are, and there is where you can sort of make your decisions based on where you should draft them. All right, that's my little format overview on this format so far. It's been a fast one. I'm not sure it's going to go down as one of the most well liked, but I don't know. I haven't hated it. I haven't loved it either. But thanks for watching.